Hey, what's up, guys? It's Bakes here, and thank you for joining me for today's episode of my random horror reviews. Now, it actually wasn't too long ago in this series when I did my review of Paranormal Activity. Because I was talking about that movie, I brought up how every now and then a horror movie or horror franchise comes along that just really does change the game and, will leave a legacy or impact behind. And like you can almost talk about the behind the scenes all day because it's just as interesting as the movie itself. And that's the same scenario with today's movie, a very iconic horror film and soon to be franchise after this movie came out, 2004's Saw. Now, I've actually done a review, funny enough, of Saw 2 before on my channel. I've also done a review of the spin off movie Spiral, but never actually did a review of Saw, so I thought no time like the present, let's get around to it. I find the impact and legacy of Saw so interesting, but we can get into that later. Let's talk about the actual movie itself first. So, getting into the plot of Saw, who hasn't seen Saw before, or at least heard about it? But these two men wake up in this dingy room, chained up, and they don't really have much memory of how they got there. Though through backtracking and storytelling and jumping back and forth in time and whatever, we learn that there is a serial killer out there, and I use the term serial killer loosely because he actually doesn't kill anybody. His name is the Jigsaw Killer, and he puts people that he feels need to learn lessons and maybe have done things wrong in their life. He puts them into traps where if they don't follow the rules of the game or don't escape the trap, they end up offing themselves. So he actually doesn't kill anybody. But he's got like this whole, system going on, and it's been going on for a while. These two men aren't the first victims in his games, so you've got like this side story where the police are trying to figure out who he is and track him down and whatever. But like I said, these two men that wake up in this dingy room at the start of the movie, they start to realize, okay, we're now the two latest victims within one of his games. So I'm just going to leave it there for the plot. As I said, I'm sure everyone knows the gist of Saw. Even if you haven't seen it before, you would have just heard it by now. But yeah, let's get into my thoughts of 2004's Saw. So before we go any further, I'm just going to say a quick sorry in advance. I've got birds outside my window right here and they keep making noise and I can't get them to fuck off. So if you hear any background noise, it's just the birds. But for people who are casual horror fans, I think the OG Saw movie that we're talking about today often gets misremembered for what it really is. Fairly probably due to the fact of what the franchise became, but people throw around the term torture porn and violence for the sake of violence when talking about this movie, when really the first movie is extremely close to being led as like this gritty crime thriller. Yes, horror falls at the forefront still, but tone wise, this movie feels along the lines of something like Seven, for example. It's got this mystery, police investigation, suspects, twists and turns, but it also just happens to have some really gruesome kills that come from these horrific traps. So I think a lot of people just remember this as being like one thing. As I said, torture porn gets thrown around a lot towards Saw, but it's not really that. And I feel like another aspect I feel most people get wrong with this movie is they either go one or two ways when talking about the budget for this movie. Maybe they forget how minimal or low budget this movie is just in general, or because of the memory of it being low budget, they remember it as being this cheap, gory splatterfest. And I've heard so many people describe, oh, have you ever seen Saw? Like, again, who hasn't seen Saw? But they go, have you ever seen Saw? Oh, it's that like really cheap, stupid movie where people's heads get ripped. And you're like, no, no, no. The first Saw is not really like that much at all. This is a lower budgeted movie, but it blows my mind, especially watching it back for this review in particular, how well they pull off what they did with what they had here. Like, back in 2004, yes, this essentially was a low budget indie movie, but now in modern times, there are indie movies coming out with higher budgets that just don't get away with what they were able to do here in Saw. Like, it's incredible. You're watching this movie and it just feels above and beyond what they had at their resources. And I think that's just, again, what I was talking about in the intro. When you talk about the behind the scenes and what they had to work with and what they were trying to do, they like really did smash this out of the park. And like I said, I feel like this movie often gets misrepresented for, you know, being a splatter gore fest, which it's kind of not, but does have those elements, I guess. And, you know, the budget, you know, a lot of people hang shit on the budget, or it's lower budget, or, you know, they remember it being schlocky when it's actually not that at all. So getting into the story now, I really do like the mystery and crime aspect, and especially when you add in the gritty elements of the traps and the games that are being played. And even though this is one of, if not the best written Saw movie in the franchise, I do feel like at parts, especially towards the end, it does get a little convoluted. Now, if you're familiar with the Saw franchise as a whole, comparing it to later entries in the franchise, this does stay a fairly straight road when it comes to being convoluted. But like I said, towards the end, I feel like it does get a lot, you know. But there are certain things in this movie that I've never been able to get my head around fully and understand why something has been done the way it has. Um, like with all of my reviews, I try not to spoil anything. Unfortunately, my biggest example is a big reveal, so I don't want to say it for those who haven't seen this movie. But the best I can like describe it is like that body in the room on the floor. Does it need to be there? Like, I've always had that question, and maybe I've just never clicked with a certain aspect and I've missed something or whatever, but just things like that. And that's always one that stuck out to me with this film whenever I rewatch it back or just think back on it. I'm always like, does it need to be there? But like that kind of stuff and a few other things do often get to me when I'm watching this movie, or like I said, thinking back on it. But I still really like the story in this one, like I said, especially the crime and mystery elements. And like I was even saying before, I feel like those are elements that do get overlooked or misrepresented when people are talking about Saw. Like I said, it's a really good, gritty thriller crime horror movie, which a lot of people just remember it for having traps that, you know, pull people's heads off and, you know, break their bones and whatever. Like, I feel like this movie, you know, the story of what is actually going on is really, really strong and really solid. I think the cast in this movie also deliver a solid enough job. You do see a couple of performances that do sort of drop up and down in quality, but I think that's just probably due to like casting budgets or whatever. I always forget that Danny Glover is in this movie. Like, I just seen him pop up on screen again. I'm like, oh my gosh, I always forget Danny Glover's in this. But the main thing, nobody gives a performance so bad or whatever that it becomes distracting or whatnot. You know, I feel like, again, for what this movie is, the cast do a solid enough job. Like I said, most people remember this film for being gore and traps, and though, like I explained earlier, I do feel like that is a misrepresentation of this first Saw movie, the effects and traps are still really solid. The traps in this first movie, though, they may not reach the excitement or entertainment factor as, you know, some of the later installments, but they're iconic. You know, you have the reverse bear trap in this movie, like one of, if not the most iconic Saw trap of all time. And another thing I really like about them is the traps in this one stay grounded, which definitely suits the nature of what this movie's trying to be. You know, some of the later installments, you know, you have a trap where this leads to this, and this rips one arm off, and then that triggers this thing, and that twists this leg around. You know, it gets a little bit over the top, but the traps in this one, like I said, they stay grounded. The most iconic one, like I just mentioned, the reverse bear trap, it feels plausible. All it is a bear trap instead of closing, opening. You know, it makes sense. You've got someone just crawling through a barbed wire maze. All it is just a matter of time for them to get through this maze and them cutting themselves up. Like, it doesn't feel like it's beyond reality. Like, it does feel grounded what this movie is trying to be. So, I do like the traps in that aspect. Like I said, maybe don't reach the entertainment or excitement factor as later installments, but they're good. And I guess touching on that iconic note of talking about the traps and whatever, That's kind of where I want to finish on, I guess, before I get to my rating, how iconic this movie is, and I guess you can add to that how iconic the franchise is. The theme, like, you hear that theme everywhere, but just rewatching the movie now, it still gives me goosebumps. Like, it's such an addictive and iconic theme. I love it. Billy the Puppet, again, iconic. The voice changer. Do you want to play a game? Like, that quote in general has sort of cemented itself in pop culture. Even the rotating camera with the jump cut editing while people are in traps. I know that is a big thing with the franchise where a lot of people don't like it, but then, a lot of fans do like it. I'm sort of neither for or against it. Like, sometimes it does annoy me and it makes me feel a little bit sick, but again, it's iconic to the franchise. And yeah, like I said, that's sort of the last thing I just wanted to touch on before I get to a rating and wrap up my thoughts of Saw. So even though on the grand scheme of things, this is a later franchise to the horror genre and the horror zeitgeist and whatnot, there's no wonder how these films became so iconic and so marketable as well. You got to remember, after this movie came out, they like greenlit a sequel straight away, and this franchise was dropping a film almost annually. Pretty much every Halloween, you had a new Saw movie in the cinemas. And yes, the movies through the franchise changed style and vibes a little bit over time, and they became more gore and trap based. But they knew what worked for the audiences and the market at that time, around 2004. That's when movies like Hostel and everything were becoming more popular. So, of course, they went to more gore and trap based movies as the franchise went on. It's what people wanted to see. Also, this first movie, I think a lot of people kind of forget, was directed by James Wan, which obviously, if you're a horror fan, you're going to know who James Wan is. But, James Wan, in my opinion, taking personal taste in movies out of the equation, I think is one of the most marketable modern horror directors out there, especially in the mainstream. And what I mean by that is, if you're a horror fan, you're going to throw out names like Robert Eggers, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, those names, for example. But when you're looking at it from a mainstream point of view, James Wan is the man. Like, he has done so many mainstream horror movies to so much success, and that's not me saying either that I don't think he's a good director. I think he's one of the best modern directors doing horror movies around. Like, him and probably Mike Flanagan are the two doing mainstream stuff the best, in my opinion, at the moment, or if they've at least been doing it for a while. But I feel like non-horror fans see James Wan's name get thrown around, whether it's in a trailer or a poster, and the name rings a bell and they know what he's capable of. So, like I was saying, in a mainstream light, James Wan has been crushing it, and this was pretty much the starting point. You can't forget Leigh Whannell either. Leigh Whannell and James Wan have been movie-making partners for a long time. Leigh Whannell also wrote this movie, but he also had a kind of starring role in this movie. He did play a main character. And I think Leigh Whannell is kind of underrated as an actor as well. He's not popped up in too much, but he's been in movies before. But I think most people would know Leigh Whannell now for being a director. He did Upgrade, he did The Invisible Man, probably his most successful movie. He did the new Wolfman from this year, which I haven't seen yet, but yeah, he's a very capable director as well, and he does really cool movies. And before I move on, you also can't forget James Wan and Leigh Whannell, both Australian, representing us Aussies. So good on them for showing us some love from Australia and everything. But getting to a rating, because I'm just rambling now, I'm going to give Saw, the OG Saw from 2004, a strong 8.5. I know that's probably a little bit lower than what you guys expected, especially for such a iconic film and a movie that is good. But like I said, there is a lot I really like about this movie, but I'm just going to go with an 8.5. It's still a really strong score, guys. I know it's probably a little underwhelming from a lot of the stuff I was saying, but I think it's great. I think it is one of the best, if not the best, Saw movie in the franchise. I think there's ones that, later on, even though the quality of the story and what's going on isn't the strongest, man, they're so fucking entertaining. they're so entertaining. Like, it's just addictive to watch some of those later ones, just based on the traps alone or something like that. Honestly, if I had to pick the three best quality Saw movies, it's the first Saw, probably Saw 2, and it's got to be Saw X. I think, I know I'm going to get hate for this, but I think you can throw Spiral into that equation because it's a fairly competently well-made movie, and the shots and everything on a technical standpoint looks really good. It's the story in that one where, you know, there's plot holes and a few issues there that fall apart, but it is still, I think, one of the stronger, from a technical standpoint, made Saw movies. But I think the top three for me would be Saw 1, 2, and X. So there we go. A question that no one asked for answered. But there we go, guys. Thank you for joining me for this review of Saw. Like I said, I've done a review of Saw 2 before on my channel, done a review of Spiral. I can link them in the description below if I remember to do so, but if I forget, you'll be able to find them on my channel if they interest you at all. But thank you for joining me, guys, and I'll see you for another video soon. Peace.